this week in which he brought up some really good points about how Nick and I have not done the best job of expressing some of our core values here at the church. We haven't done a good job of communicating why those values exist, and we haven't even really told you the story of how we came to those values. And I'll save the story for another time, just for reasons that a sermon needs to be a certain amount of time. But one of those core values that we hold very dear to us is ritual. And ritual primarily is one that I have noticed as people have come in and out of Wayfarers has turned some frowns even. It's been one that I can tell people are not understanding why ritual is such a big deal to us, why ritual is important to us at Wayfarers. And I thought of really, there's no better way to teach y'all about why ritual is so important to us than Advent. For those of you that don't know what Advent is 4 weeks that the Christian church calendar has before Christmas. And in Advent, churches, usually more Episcopalian, Anglican, more higher churches, will focus on the time up to Christmas and the awaiting of the day of Christmas, essentially. And they'll focus a lot on the hope of the coming birth of Jesus. But they'll also do a second thing with Advent. What they'll do is they'll talk about the expectancy that the first century Jews had for the coming Messiah in those first 4 weeks of Advent. But they'll also talk about how, as Christians, we are also hoping for something in the future. We are hoping for the second coming of Christ. And so they relate the idea of Christ being born in a manger and the idea of us waiting on the idea of the first century Jews waiting on his coming as Messiah, and they relate that idea to the idea of us as Christians in this community today waiting on the eventual coming of Jesus. And so that's what I'm going to do today. We're going to walk through essentially what it looks like for us at Wayfarers to do that, and especially why we're so focused on that, why that's a big deal for the community. And so I'm going to talk about a couple of other topics that relate to Advent, namely hope and resurrection. And those themes are going to play a huge role in what I'm talking about. And I may be juggling a lot of different themes, so we're going to see how this goes. But it's one of those things that you can't really talk about Advent without all of these. You can't talk about Advent without hope. You can't talk about Advent without resurrection. And you definitely can't talk about Advent without ritual. And the main reason for this is that at Wayfarers in particular, we really believe in repetitive doing that develops the ideas in your head, essentially. And if you don't do things, then Christianity really is just beliefs in your head that never actually give you anything practical to do, essentially. And we really don't think that. We believe that faith in Jesus, for instance, is not just a head belief. We believe that it's something that you live out. And so having Advent, where we're living out a hope for the second coming of Christ, for Christmas, is part of that for us. So that's really some groundwork just to kind of give you an idea of where we're going to go on tonight and just kind of some different ideas associated with Advent. What I'm going to do first, before I kind of launch into the verses that you just saw, and we'll pull them back up so that you can have kind of a visual on that. But what I'm going to do first is we're going to walk through a video that the Bible Project does. If you don't know who the Bible Project is, the Bible Project is a wonderful nonprofit program that's based out of Portland, Oregon, that does, I would call 6-minute videos on explaining different themes in the Bible. And in specific, since we're talking about Advent and awaiting the hope of Jesus coming back in the second coming, we are going to look at a video of the Bible Project where they focus on hope in particular. And they focus on the word hope in the New Testament. So we're going to go ahead and play that video if we can get all that.
So let's say you want to describe the feeling of anticipating a future that's better than the present. You might be giddy or excited or maybe unsure, but most of us know that experience. We call it hope. It's a state of anticipation, and it's crucial for healthy human existence. And it's a really important concept in the Bible. In fact, there are many words for hope in the ancient languages of the Bible, and they're all fascinating. In the Old Testament, there are two main Hebrew words translated as hope. The first is yachal, which means simply to wait for. Like in the story of Noah and the ark, as the flood waters recede, Noah had to yachal for weeks. The other Hebrew word is kavah, which also means to wait. It's related to the Hebrew word kav, which means cord. When you pull a kav tight, you produce a state of tension until there's release. That's kavah, the feeling of tension and expectation while you wait for something to happen. The prophet Isaiah depicts God as a farmer who plants vines and kavahs for good grapes. Or the prophet Micah talks about farmers who both kavah and yachal for morning dew to give moisture to the land. So in biblical Hebrew, hope is about waiting or expectation. But waiting for what? In the period of Israel's prophets, as the nation was sinking into self-destruction, Isaiah said, "At this moment, the Lord's hiding his face from Israel, so I will kavah for him." The only hope Isaiah had in those dark days was the hope for God himself. You find the same notion of hope all over the book of Psalms, where these words appear over 40 times. In almost every case, what people are waiting for is God. Like in Psalm 130, the poet cries out from a pit of despair, "I kavah for the Lord. Let Israel yachal for the Lord, because he's loyal and will redeem Israel from its sins." Biblical hope is based on a person, which makes it different from optimism. Optimism is about choosing to see in any situation how circumstances could work out for the best. But biblical hope is not focused on circumstances. In fact, hopeful people in the Bible often recognize there's no evidence things will get better, but you choose hope anyway. Like the prophet Hosea, he lived in a dark time when Israel was being oppressed by foreign empires, and he chose hope when he said God could turn this valley of trouble into a door of hope, like the day when Israel came up from the land of Egypt. God had surprised his people with redemption back in the days of the Exodus, and he could do so again. So it's God's past faithfulness that motivates hope for the future. You look forward by looking backward, trusting in nothing other than God's character. It's like the poet of Psalm 39 who says, "And now, O Lord, what else can I kavah for? You are my yachal." In the New Testament, the earliest followers of Jesus cultivated the similar habit of hope. They believed that Jesus' life, death, and resurrection was God's surprising response to our slavery to evil and death. The empty tomb opened up a new door of hope, and they used the Greek word elpis to describe this anticipation. The Apostle Peter said that Jesus' resurrection opened up a living hope, that people can be reborn, to become new and different kinds of humans. More than once, the Apostle Paul says the good news about Jesus announces the elpis of glory. In both cases, this elpis is based on a person, the risen Jesus who has overcome death. And this hope wasn't just for humans. The apostles believed that what happened to Jesus in the resurrection was a foretaste of what God had planned for the whole universe. In Paul's words, it's a hope that creation itself will be liberated from slavery to corruption into freedom when God's children are glorified. So Christian hope is bold, waiting for humanity and the whole universe to be rescued from evil and death. And some would say it's crazy, and maybe it is. But biblical hope isn't optimism based on the odds. It's a choice to wait for God to bring about a future that's as surprising as a crucified man rising from the dead. Christian hope looks back to the risen Jesus in order to look forward. And so we wait. That's what the biblical words for hope are all about.
All right, so that was a lot in 4 minutes. To kind of break down some of the themes.
Hey, thanks for watching this word study video.
We got the little, thank you. Yeah, I'm okay being interrupted by Tim Mackey. That's okay. But yeah, so to break down a little bit of that video, one of the things they talk about is how hope is, for Christians at least, something that doesn't have a lot of reason specifically for hope in the future. Meaning that the world looks really bleak when we hope in the present. We can see that just easily when you pull out your phone and look at the news. It doesn't look like Jesus died on a cross and became king of the world, honestly. It looks as if humans are still sinning every day. It looks as if humans are still going about life as if the cross had never happened. And the only real shift that we saw was the church come on the scene. And even the church has a history of different things in history with the Crusades, which I believe were horrible, and different things of that nature. And so we can look at that and have a very pessimistic view of how things have turned out 2,000 years later. But one of the things that I think is pivotable, I think that's the right word, or essential to Christianity is that, like he said, you look at the past, at what Christ did on the cross, and that is your way forward. And we're going to kind of break that down even further as we go on. But that is essentially the tension of Advent. In the Advent season, what we do in this 4-week period before Christmas is we focus on the fact that things aren't okay. And it's okay to admit that. Things aren't okay. They're not okay in our family lives, maybe. They're not okay in our relationships with other people. They're just not okay a lot of the times. Maybe you have a great life and this doesn't mean anything to you, but I'll wager to say that some of you in this room don't have that life that you crave for, that you wish for, that you hope for. And it can be really hard to sit in that, to sit in the fact that I don't have everything that I want out of life. I haven't met all the checks and boxes of what life tells me I should be. I don't have happy relationships with the people that I trust. And what I would say to that is that Advent is the time for you. Advent is this time that we come to every year on our calendar where we take a moment to stop and say, yes, things aren't where I want them to be, and that's okay. It's not where we want to end, but that point, taking the point to say, things aren't great right now, and then building off of that with the hope that we know exists in Scripture is our starting point, right? So for some of you in this room, it might just be admitting that for the first time, because I've talked with several people, and people of a more optimistic bent, I would say, have a hard time even admitting that, have a hard time admitting that things aren't okay. And this is what I love about the first century and how they lived Advent, is the opening lines of Mark open with a man named John the Baptist who comes on the scene and says, things are not all right. He comes on and says to the Pharisees, the leaders, the religious leaders of the time, he says to them that they are hypocrites, that they're not living right, that the people that everybody else is looking up to in their land, that the people everybody thinks are the most pious and holy of the Jews, they are hypocrites. And then he implores the Roman soldiers, don't steal from people. Don't take too much in your taxes. And he begins to call out the sins of this community and ask for them to baptize themselves, which up until this point, baptism wasn't really a thing. And he calls them to this because he is preparing the way for the king. He's getting them ready for the coming of the king who is righteous in the face of their unrighteousness. And that's Advent again. Advent is that time where John the Baptist comes on the scene and says, things are not all right. And here today, as we approach the Christmas season, my job here is to be like John the Baptist and say, things are not okay. Things aren't going well in the world after we've had a big pandemic that has caused a lot of people, including a lot of my close friends who are non-Christians, to go back into licentious behaviors and to drink themselves silly. Things are not okay. And for me, that is the time that we sit in Advent. Now, that's the depressing point, right? That's the point that no one wants to hear. That's the point where we have to come to grips with the fact that, yeah, things aren't great. But this is where hope takes effect. And if you remember the story of Jesus, you know that he walked into this scene with a purpose, to establish himself as king over this world. And he walked into this world intending to die on a cross, which was the most horrific, shameful, awful way to die. Even the Romans thought it was that way. They reserved it for the worst of worst people. And there are documents that we've found in centuries later where people make fun of Christians. The Romans make fun of Christians because we worship a God that was crucified. Because that doesn't make sense to have God be crucified, the most horrific, the most shameful way to be crucified. And yet that's what he intended to do. And he started his ministry intending to do that. And why is that? Why did he want to do that? Because he knew that the only way to deal with the brokenness of this world, to deal with Advent, to deal with that things are not okay, is to take all that on himself, to take all that brokenness, to take all that mess, to take all of that on himself, and on the cross, die with it. And what happens in 3 days? The most unexpected thing ever. In 3 days' time, the mess of our lives, the mess of everyone's lives from the beginning of time to the end of time, dies away, but he rises. And now he rised to visit his disciples again. And they are completely and totally don't even believe half the time because they can't understand how someone could be killed and then rise from the dead. It's the hope that sounds silly and stupid even to assume that someone would die and then their body actually come back to life. Science still can't explain it. It's the most unscientific thing to ever happen. And that is what we believe, right? That's why all of us are gathered in this room. We're gathered in this room because we believe in an unscientific event that defies all events before and after. The breath of life was given back to Jesus. And sometimes we just kind of gloss over that. We gloss over the resurrection, and we gloss over how powerful that really was. Because the thing is about the apostles and Peter in these verses is they didn't just say, oh, that was an event that happened 2,000 years ago, that's why we meet, and we're going to teach you theology from this point forward. They didn't do that. What they did was they saw that as the reason for their hope. They saw that as the reason for why they should take a step forward in the mess of their own lives. And that's what you see with these verses. I don't know if we have the slide for the first verses or not. Dante, do we have that? Yeah, there we go. So it says, "Praise be to the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. In his great mercy, he has given us new birth in a living hope through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead." So notice what he's saying here, right? You get new birth and living hope through the resurrection. It's not just an event that happened 2,000 years ago that, oh yeah, I believe that, and then we move on. This is the source of your hope. Living hope, actually. And if you remember in the video that Tim Mackey was talking about, living hope is a type of hope that's transformative, right? It's a type of hope that makes you go into the future a changed person. Now, the hard part about that is that some days you wake up and you don't feel like you have living hope. And honestly, this is what I struggled with the most as I was building this sermon, is that if most of you that know me know that I don't have a tendency to do this very well. I have a tendency to be very moody at times, and I don't live up to that hope as much as I should. And the main reason I don't is because I forget the resurrection. I forget that things got really bad on a cross, really bad on a cross. And I forget that even at that point, even at the worst moment in history, 3 days later, everything was upended. And that's something that should resonate in our souls, in our hearts, in our minds. The idea that wherever you are in the mess of your life, that 3 days later comes glory, right? Maybe not literally 3 days later, but you get my idea. And that's something that I think we all need to hear today. The ending section of this passage is I spliced something from chapter 3 and a couple verses. Dante, can we go to the next slide in this? One more, I think? Maybe it was, yeah, there we go. This ending section, but even if you should suffer for what is right. So even though we hold on to the resurrection as true, right? Even then, we're still going to suffer. We're still going to get persecution. And he says, even if you should suffer for what is right, you are blessed. Don't let fear, do not fear their threats. Do not be frightened, but in your heart, revere Christ as Lord. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have. So what's crazy about that is when I first read these verses, when I was like 21, I read these as an apologetic. I read these as, give a reason for why I believe what I believe. But if you notice here, it's not about go read every C.S. Lewis book and come up with like the best way to defend Christianity. It's far more deeper and more convicting for me. Give the reason for the hope you have. Meaning you should be a type of person that walks around in the world today and shows hope because you believe this. And people should want to ask you, why are you so hopeful? And you should give the reason, because Christ died for me and because he resurrected. And that really convicted me because honestly, up until researching this sermon, I wasn't doing that. And that's something that I'm calling y'all today to do. To be so obviously filled with hope that people ask you, why are you so hopeful in the middle of 2020 and 2021, right? I want you to think about, do people in your life know you as a hopeful person? Do people in your life know you as someone that sees through the mess of this world, that acknowledges it? I'm not calling you to ignore it, but I am calling you to see through it to resurrection. And I want you to ask that in your hearts. Ask yourself, are you someone that shows hope to other people? Because honestly, I wasn't until I started reading these. And it's something that I'm going to take with me in my life going forward. To try and do this. I'm not always going to do it. But I'm going to try. That's where Yoda's wrong. I actually believe that you trying is okay. Trying means that you care enough. It's people that don't try, that just give up, that don't accept hope. And maybe sometimes you should have hope for yourselves. I see a lot of us today that feel so overwhelmed with just life in general, just different things that happen in our lives that make us feel like we are worthless. And the reality is that Christ died for you to give you a hope, not so that you hang your heads and feel depressed all the time and feel like there's no answer. Because he is the answer. He's always been the answer. And what's astonishing to me is that we can look back into the past and see the power of the cross and the power of resurrection. But the people in Isaiah and Ezekiel's time, the people in the Old Testament, they didn't know. They didn't know what was going to happen. They didn't have any real tangible knowledge of what the Messiah was going to look like, what Jesus was going to look like. They just knew that God had promised to them that he was going to be their God. And if you can think that some of them still, in spite of not having tangible facts to rest themselves on, still in spite of that, they still hoped. If you can think they can do that, then I can guess that you can probably do it today. I can guess that you can look backwards into how Jesus was and what he did on that cross and in the tomb 3 days later. And I can guess that that can give you a bit of hope. That's the Advent season this year for me. The Advent season is, yes, acknowledging that things are bad. But at the same time, that going forward, we can take a step towards hope, take a step towards that day when he comes back again. That's the other thing we don't talk about in churches a lot of the time. We don't talk about the fact that Jesus one day is going to come back. It's something that you hardly hear from a pulpit anymore. And it's one of the things that I think should drive us in our life, is that it's not just live a moral life so you go to heaven, right? It's the idea that one day the king's going to return, and the king's going to call us all to give an account. It's going to be just like a king would be. It's not a democracy at that point anymore. The king will come, and he will demand your service. And Revelation says that every knee will bow, no matter how they feel about the king. And then from there on, the account books are opened, and things are handled the way the king decides. And that's a point that, for me, brings hope. It brings a little bit of fear, too. And I think there should be a little bit of fear there. But for me, it brings hope because it means that people that live in this life that have looked like they have done everything right on the outside, people that look like they've succeeded in life in every way and capacity, but inwardly have done it through deception and malice and deceit, those people will be called to account at the second coming. And all things will be put right. And I am really hopeful for that day. Hopeful for the day when I don't have to defend the faith anymore, but Jesus will himself. Right? That's the day I'm looking forward to. The day when all bets are off and he calls everybody to what is real and what is true. And we don't have to spend any more time reading the Bible trying to figure out what it says. You know? That day, he will set everything the way it always should have been. And I'm looking forward to that with all my heart. For some of you, that might bring a little bit of fear, though. You know, it might bring a little bit of, well, there's some things in my life that I don't think Jesus would be proud of. And that's a good place to be in, honestly, because that pushes us to be better. I don't think you're worthless if you feel that way. But I do think that that's something that you should pray to God about and ask for forgiveness for. I think it was last month we had a confession week where we confessed our sins to God. And if there's something, as I'm saying these words, that makes you afraid of that second coming, then maybe confess that to God and talk to him about that. I think one of the things that I want more than anything to leave you guys with, and I'll close with this, is that even if things are bad in your life right now, that overall, it's going to end okay. It's going to be okay. That Jesus is going to come back, and if you're faithfully pursuing him, he'll set everything right, including family drama. I'm going to pray. Dear God, thank you so much for tonight. Thank you for the Advent season. God, I pray that my word struck home, that something I said gave hope into the situation. I know there's also darkness in this sermon. There's the admittance that things are messed up. But there's also light, God, the glorious light of your resurrection, and what that means for us, what that means for the future. And I pray that some part of this resonated with the people sitting in this room, that they go out having a reason to hope, that they go out and people ask them, what is your reason for hope? In your name I pray. Amen. So to end this, what we're going to do is we're going to have Jacob actually come and read an Advent poem. Is it a poem? Sure. And what I want to invite all of y'all today is to take the hope of resurrection in your mind the hope of the future. And as he's reading these words, feel that hope in you. Let these words build a hope in you. Because Jesus is coming and things are going to be okay. Thank you.
I am hope. In this world, there is no force that can destroy me. Though I may flicker when I stand unsheltered in the strongest storm, my flame cannot be snuffed out by the winds and the rainstorms of the soul. Yet, I can be ignored. I can be hidden away. There are many who squeeze their eyes tightly shut, so my light cannot reach them. But even with eyes shut, they may hear me speak. For I am the voice that can break the most agonizing silence with a simple whisper. One holy night long ago, I waited, forgotten by the world, with eyes shut and ears covered, dim but not extinguished, quiet but not mute. In the dark silence of the night sky over Bethlehem, angels appeared to shepherds watching their flocks, announcing the birth of God as an infant human. And as they sang, with intensity and excitement, my flame burst into an inferno. My whisper rose to a roar, created by God, embodied by the Savior, born into a stable. Open your eyes to my light. Open your ears to my voice. I am hope.
All right, so thank you guys to all of you who were here tonight. As Noah said, we got a small group tonight, but I really appreciate what you shared, Noah. I'm going to admit, I'm in the same boat. I used to think that verse was all about like arguing with people about Christianity, and I've never noticed that the thing you're giving a reason for is the hope that you have. And I do think that's a really good challenge for us, that the hope we have would be so evident that that's what people would want to ask us about, like that. I don't know that that's something that unfortunately we are known for as Christians anymore. And can you imagine if that's the thing that believers would be known for? So, as Noah said, this is Advent season. We're behind. There's already been 2 Sundays of Advent before this one that we kind of missed out on, and so I figured we would get kind of caught up today a little bit on what all of those Sundays are about as we kind of get into finishing up here with our communion time. But if you don't know, each of the 4 Sundays of Advent lets you focus on a different thing. And the first Sunday of Advent is to focus on hope specifically, which is what Noah has covered for us so well today. So I'm not going to say anything more about that. I think Noah covered it. That's a good one for us to really focus on. But the other Sundays of Advent, I lost my note here. I don't know it off the top of my head. I'm sorry. The other Sundays represent other themes that you may have heard in church a lot, but that kind of end up meaning they're just Christian-y words, that we don't really know what they mean. So I appreciate that Noah helped to kind of cover hope for us a little bit more. And that Bible Project video was really good. I've missed that one before too, on giving you all of the biblical context for hope. But the other Sundays that we've gone through so far up until this Sunday would have been the Sundays of peace and of joy specifically, which is why I like that we also sang about joy to the world and the joyfulness that we can really feel. But I really wanted to focus in on peace specifically, just because I've told you guys this story before, but peace is one of those that is hard for us to understand, because I think we have a very narrow view of exactly what the Bible means by peace. But I remember I was most impacted by this when me and Adrian were in a hotel room or hotel conference room in Israel on this trip that we took a few years ago. And the hotel conference room also doubled as a bomb shelter for the hotel that we were in. The group that we had gone with was doing like a Bible study, and we found this conference room in the hotel we were staying at, and we thought we would stay there. And as we were walking in, we noticed that the door is like one of those massive, like, bank vault doors, that's just like very unnerving as you're going into that room. And our guide informed us that most every hotel, especially in Jerusalem where we were at the time, has some kind of bomb shelter because of unfortunately how common rockets and missiles and just all kinds of threats of violence can be in that part of the world. And it especially hit me because the Bible study that we were doing was on the armor of God, and it talked about being ready to present the gospel of peace. That's something that gets brought up in that passage of the armor of God. And I was especially impacted by the fact that I think you had been the one that had introduced this to me a little bit before I had even gone to Florida, but I didn't realize that the name of Jerusalem itself has shalom, peace, within the name. That it's kind of the city of peace is what it's supposed to represent. And I was just kind of distraught by the fact that we were supposed to be sitting in the city of peace, and we were inside of a bomb shelter in the city that is supposed to be that city on a hill that represents the peace that God is supposed to bring. And you can get really discouraged in that place when you think about that, and you think about, has God failed? Has the mission as what Jerusalem was supposed to represent, has it failed? But I think since then I've been incredibly moved by the fact that no, the city, that physical city, isn't the promise that we're all, it's not the thing that we're all joyful for. It's not the good news that we're all waiting for. In that passage in the armor of God, it says it's the gospel of peace, the good news of peace. That is the gospel that we are bringing as Christians. And I think lots of times we think that our gospel is maybe just like a gospel of forgiveness, maybe is what the word we would use. You've done a lot of bad things. Don't worry, Jesus forgave you. But I've been particularly moved by the fact that the gospel, the good news that we have, is the good news of peace. And that is what we as kind of Christians should be bringing. We're the people that should be these kind of like peaceful people wherever it is that we go. And so I've thought about this in particular as I've thought about Adrian, my wife, and I've actually thought about this a little bit as I've been thinking about Reagan as well, gotten to know Joey and Reagan a little bit more, but their personality types, as far as the Enneagram goes, Enneagram 9, which a lot of times is called the peacemaker, and they're personality types that get criticized a lot for being like conflict, and everyone's like, oh, you should just say what you want to say, get out there and be ready to say what you mean, and don't be afraid of fear. And I've noticed a lot of the 9s in my life get criticized for their avoidance of conflict in some way. And I know at least me and Noah, with our Enneagram numbers, we're more aggressive type numbers, and we're the kind of people who are like, no, I'm just going to tell you what I think right now. I don't care about the conflict that it may bring. But especially as Adrian and I have been married over the last few years, I have noticed that there is really something to be said about when you are a person who is just a peaceful person. And Adrian's noticed this all the time. She just like radiates peace, I think, whenever she's in places that she's at. And because of that, people will just confess the craziest things to Adrian all the time. They will just walk up to her and just start saying, man, I've just never felt right ever since my husband left me last year. And Adrian's like, I just met you today. Like, I'm just shopping for apples right here at the grocery store. I don't know why you were telling me all of this. But I've just been moved by the fact that our entire world is so chaotic right now that when people are those kind of people that just radiate peace, I think it just like draws people. People are like so attracted to it because they're attracted to at least one safe space, I guess, in a place, a safe person where I can know that this person's not going to attack me, this person's not going to cancel me, this person's not going to get upset at me over something that I say, and people are just so attracted to having that. And so, especially if that's the I think in some ways that's that personality type is showing us what we as Christians should be. If we are these people who are bringing a gospel of peace, I would love to see that world where we are people that are just sort of walking safe spaces in that way. People that are walking around and just radiating that peace and being just kind of a safe, calm, and peaceful place for people to really connect with God. And I think what you really get when you see that is sort of the fulfillment of what Noah was saying. What we're looking forward to is this final, ultimate time of peace without the chaos that is so present in our world. And I think one of the best ways we can get people you got to give them the gateway drug for it. You got to get them hooked on it originally at first. The way you can kind of give them some hope for that amazing, ultimate, final, and total peace is to kind of get them hooked on a taste of it, maybe around you and being around you as a peaceful Christian, particularly. So I have no idea what the application for that is necessarily. You guys go and figure out how am I going to be a peaceful person. But in whatever way it can be, I think our world is just so chaotic that if we can kind of be those walking safe places, safe spaces for people, I think that could really, really be something that so many of us are needing. And I honestly think that's something that is what attracted people to Jesus in the first place. They could just sense that about him, I think. And so, as we go in this time of communion, when Jesus instituted this, I think, as Noah said, we forget that within the words of it, he's getting us to look forward to that final time. He says, hey, I'm not going to drink of this cup again until I do it with you guys in that new kingdom, the second advent. That's something to look forward to. And so, I think that's what I would want you guys to reflect on as we take communion here today is look forward to that time. Maybe as you take the cup, as you take the bread, look backwards, remember what Jesus has done, but especially in this Advent season, I would encourage you, look forward to that time when we can eventually have the peace that I think we also so desperately desire. And maybe ask Jesus how you can kind of bring that into the present as well. So I'm going to pray, and then we'll just turn it over there. Lord, please, I ask that you would just help us to be those peaceful people, those people known as people of peace, and help that peace to be just that little glimmer of hope in such a chaotic and dark world. I know that it's not just us, but every human being on earth, that's what we desire. We know deep in our hearts that things are not right, that all this fighting, all the arguing, all of the conflict that we see all around us is not what you intended. And we long for a time when we can finally have some peace. And I ask, Lord, that you would not let us lose hope that is coming. That's a reality. We can bank on it. We can count on your character. You've kept all of your promises. You have never failed a single promise that you've given, and you're not going to fail in this one either. We know that you are going to bring about everything that you promised that you will. And we really are so excited for that day. So as we take this time to remember, to look back and to remember what you did for us, help us also to look forward to that day when everything's going to be made right. In Jesus' name, amen.